So we have another major development in the Benson case, and this is a big one because the court here has just responded to DC's attempt to fast track and tried to contain this ruling. The DC Court of Appeals has now denied multiple emergency requests that were made by DC, and this tells you a lot about how the court is currently viewing this so-called emergency that the Benson ruling created. So let's talk about what just happened in these orders. Now, before we jump into this video, if you want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply by subscribing. You can also click the like button that just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this type of content, and so it shares it with more people. I also want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is Attorneys on Retainer. When it comes to self-defense protection, in my opinion, AOR is in a league of their own. They're backed by an actual law firm, the Attorneys for Freedom, and they're always trying to give you as much as possible as a member. Also, one of the real cool things about the company and the coverage that you get is the fact that they don't have a long list of exclusions. They will protect you and help you in self-defense cases. Maybe if you're even in a state where these types of magazines aren't allowed, but maybe you have a magazine, they're not going to use that to deny your coverage. So if you're interested, if you want to look more into Attorneys on Retainer, I highly recommend that you click the links down below in the details section, also in the pinned comment. And if you decide to sign up, you can use my code ARMEDSCHOLAR to save $25 off of the signup fee. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we have a very important update in the Benson magazine ban case, which we've been talking about. But I want to recap real quick what happened in Benson, which is very critical for understanding what is currently going on in this case. So as you may recall, the DC Court of Appeals ruled that the DC ban on magazines that hold more than 10 rounds is in fact a violation of the Second Amendment. Not only did the court strike down the magazine ban itself, but it also vacated several of Tyree Benson's related firearms convictions. So those included the possession of an unregistered firearm, the unlawful possession of ammunition, and carrying a pistol without a license. The court there said that those convictions were infected by the unconstitutional magazine ban and therefore could not stand. Now, that was a sweeping ruling with potentially massive implications. After losing, DC moved very quickly to try to contain this decision. They filed a petition for a rehearing en banc, meaning that they want the full court here to review this case. But at the same time, they filed a motion to expedite that rehearing, and they also asked the court to strip the decision of its precedential effect. In plain terms, they were trying to slow down the impact of the ruling while speeding up its reversal by the court. And they justified all of this by claiming there is an urgent public safety crisis that is now created because of this ruling, and these magazines are going to flood DC. There's going to be a ton of crime, a lot of public safety concerns, and therefore the court needed to block this immediately. But here's the key development of what just happened in this case. The court here just issued an order and has denied the motion to expedite, and it also denied the motion to suspend the precedential status of the Benson ruling. Those were the exact tools that DC needed to try to use to contain this ruling, and the court just rejected both of those motions. What this means in practical terms is the court is not treating this like an emergency. There is no fast-track timeline, and there is no freezing of the ruling. The Benson ruling remains binding precedent for now. The court also issued another order that reinforced this point. It gave Benson 14 days to respond to the en banc panel petition, and it invited the United States to respond as well. Now, you may recall that the Trump DOJ and the US are actually on our side in this case, and so both Benson and the United States are given an opportunity to file a response for why they believe the en banc panel should not take this up, en banc review this, or reverse the ruling. And the court made it very clear that any extension of time will only be granted in extraordinary circumstances. That means the court is saying we are going to follow the normal process, we are not going to rush this like DC wants, and we're not going to block this ruling. Now, this is where things get kind of interesting in what just happened with these orders. In a separate statement, Judge Dale, I believe that's maybe how you say his name, he directly pushes back against the district's narrative. He explains that DC is attempting to manufacture a crisis by repeatedly claiming there is chaos on the ground as a result of that Benson decision. But then he essentially walks through why that claim doesn't actually hold up. He points out that the government already stopped prosecuting these magazine-related offenses more than 6 months ago. And during that entire time, there has been no flood of magazines, no spike in prosecutions, and no meaningful change in what is happening on the ground. His conclusion in this statement is very blunt. He says there has been no change at all, and this claimed public safety chaos is overstated by Washington, D.C. The judge here also addresses the district's claim that the ruling will open the floodgates and cause a surge of magazines in D.C. The court says there is no evidence of that happening right now, and no evidence that it is about to happen either. In fact, he notes that between 2018 and 2022, nearly half of the firearms prosecutions in DC already involved these types of magazines. So the idea that the ban here was effectively keeping them out in the first place is highly questionable, because he is pointing to statistics and evidence that shows that these magazines already are prevalent in the area. He also highlights a critical legal point that goes to the heart of this case. He explains that any confusion in enforcement is being caused by DC itself. The reason Benson was convicted of carrying without a license is because the district refused to allow people to register firearms equipped with these types of magazines. That meant that individuals were placed in a system where they could not comply with the law, but were still prosecuted under that law. And the court makes it very clear that the district could fix this immediately on their own by simply changing their own policies. He also calls out the district on its own timing. He notes that DC took 13 days to file its own en banc panel petition, but now it's asking the court to cut the other side's response time down to just 9 days. And he makes it very clear that this kind of request does not align with the idea that there is a true emergency. Now, there is a dissent that is very important to also look at. Chief Judge Blackburn Rigsby would have actually granted the expedited review of this case. Now, on the flip side, she said that she would not have actually granted that request to block the ruling itself while the petition is being sought and reviewed. So she said she would have granted the expedited review of this case, but would not have given the motion to, actually strike down the ruling as it sits right now. So her position is that Benson is at odds with other courts, including the Ninth Circuit and their decision in Duncan versus Bonta, and the prior DC decision in the Hansen case. In her view, this ruling in Benson creates a circuit split, which is something courts take very seriously. She also raises public safety concerns, essentially arguing that magazines are commonly used in unlawful activity and that the Benson ruling could create a real risk to Washington, D.C. So that was one of her concerns. She kind of just echoes what D.C. made in their own argument, saying that this creates chaos, and that's why she would have granted expedited review. But despite those concerns, the majority in this case still denied the motions. And that tells you something very important. Even with the arguments about public safety and a potential circuit split, the court still did not see a need to treat this situation as an emergency and step in on an expedited basis and to block this ruling while they were considering it. So here are where things currently stand for this issue. The en banc petition is still pending, the motion to expedite has actually been denied, and the motion to suspend the ruling has also been denied. Responses are due within 14 days, and both the Benson plaintiffs and the United States government have an opportunity to file those responses. And most importantly, the Benson ruling here remains binding precedent, at least for now. And this is why this is so critical. Benson is already being used in other major cases across the country, including the Duncan case that's pending in front of the Supreme Court, the Cheeseman ANJRPC case in the Third Circuit that's waiting for a ruling, and then multiple other challenges in the Seventh Circuit dealing with PICA. So the faster DC could have contained this ruling, the less impact it would have had on other cases nationwide. But the court here just refused to let that happen. So stepping back, here's what this really shows. A major appellate court struck down a magazine ban in DC. The government tried to rush a reversal. They also tried to rush and essentially freeze the ruling, and they claimed that this all created an urgency. And the court here said, no, we don't agree with you, and we're going to just treat this like a normal case and a normal, review or a request for en banc panel review. So that's what's currently happening in this critical challenge. As we get more information, as this gets flushed out more, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you'd like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. All of that helps to fuel the algorithm and just tells the algorithm that you enjoy this type of content, and so it shares it with more people. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.